Hello everyone, welcome to our study here in the Gospel of Luke. My name is Barbara Eccleston, and today we're going to be going over a little bit more of an introduction to the Gospel and then looking at the prologue, which is chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. As promised in my previous video, I was going to bring out my two study Bibles and look at my notes that I have written in those. There's a few things that I thought I'd mention as an introduction to Luke that I didn't remember to do yesterday. Just to put it in perspective of when this book was written, it's about 30 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. My cat is in the room and making a bit of a ruckus. He might get tossed out, but for now, we'll see. If he makes an appearance, if he makes too much ruckus, he'll have to go. Anyways, the other thing that I wanted to mention is why I said that Luke is my favorite gospel, but I didn't tell you why. And I think that's an important thing for us to talk about because it is relevant to the gospel, but I also want you to get to know me a little better. So Luke's gospel has a lot to say about people who are outcast from society. That's my phone. I'm going to let that ring. Anyways, it has a lot to say about people who are outcast from society, the downtrodden, the forsaken, just people who are, we might say, down on their luck. They're just going through hard times. And I relate to a lot of that. And so, Luke is very compassionate in his writing toward these people. And they would have been people that the religious elite of the time, they wouldn't have had anything to do with them. But Luke is speaking directly to them and about them and uses them as Jesus uses them in his parables and stuff. But those parables are unique to Luke's gospel. They were left out of the one that Matthew wrote to the Jews. Maybe because Matthew didn't feel like Jews would relate to these people very well. But Luke, the Gentile doctor, he had other thoughts and he was sure to include them. So I'm grateful that he did. We wouldn't have things like the prodigal son or the Good Samaritan. Those are two very famous parables that Jesus taught that are only in Luke's gospel. The other thing that our friend here, Dr. Luke, wrote about was women. He speaks to women and about women and shows us what Jesus taught about women and how Jesus interacted with them. Throughout the gospel, women are present. And again, that's a unique thing that the other three gospels don't do as good a job of, in my opinion. He also, I think he handles death and pain and suffering and grief. And those are things that, as a doctor, he would see day to day in his work, and that he is particularly aware of. Sorry, cat. But anyways, this is really a gospel that's written to me. Not only am I a Gentile, I'm not a Jew, but I've often felt an outcast and neglected and downtrodden and such like that. But I've also suffered a lot of grief in my life, and I'm widowed and I'm a woman. And so in many ways, this gospel is my gospel. Okay, so let's begin in earnest now. We will look into the Gospel of Luke. I'm just going to read here for you from the prologue is what it's called, or maybe your Bible uses the word introduction. It's Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, it seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out for you in consecutive order, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the exact truth about the things you have been taught. Okay, so that is Luke 1 through 4, and this is the NASB, New American Standard Bible, that I'm reading from. That's my version that I'll always be using unless I'll tell you if it's something different. A few things to note here, as I mentioned yesterday, that's all one sentence. Luke has a great command of the Greek language, and he is probably the best technical writer in the New Testament, using the Greek to the very highest level that you can imagine. He's a very learned man. What he's done here is he's taken basically 3 years out of his life, and he's traveled with the Apostle Paul on his missionary journeys and been his personal physician. But while he's traveling, he's also being this great historian and a great investigator. He is researching the life of Christ, and he is interviewing person after person along the journey of people who knew Jesus personally, who listened to him preach, who saw the miracles that he performed, and he's taking careful notes. And he does this for 3 years. Then when he's after this journey's ended, these journeys, he's with Paul while Paul is imprisoned in Rome, and he uses that time to compile these notes, and he makes the Gospel of Luke, and he makes the book of Acts, which is kind of the sequel. It's part 2. And he's doing this unknowing. It doesn't indicate anywhere in here that he had an inkling that 2,000 years later, you and I would be sitting here reading this letter of his. He did this with the sole purpose, as far as we know, because he had a friend whose name is Theophilus, or maybe that's not his personal name, maybe that's just a title given to him. But his friend Theophilus was a new Christian, and Luke felt compelled to make sure that Theophilus would know everything that he could about who Jesus was, and to get his foundation in Christianity, to get his faith grounded properly in truth, and that he could live a life and be steadfast because he knew the truth. He states that clearly in verse 4. He says, so that you may know the exact truth about the things you have been taught. Now, we don't know if they were taught to him by Luke, but we can kind of assume that maybe they were, that Theophilus is Luke's student, and that Theophilus was maybe converted to Christianity through Luke. We don't know exactly how or when or how that happened, but we can pretty much assume that. I think that's safe to do that. But anyways, he's writing this story, this story of the life of Christ, and he's going to do it in consecutive order. He says he's going to do it thoroughly. Anyway, so this man Theophilus, we're not really sure who he is. The name Theophilus means lover of God, and so that could be his title. It's a Greek name, so he might be someone whose parents were Christians. Probably not. I mean, it's only been 30 years since Jesus lived, though. So maybe he could be that his parents were Christian and they gave him this name at birth, hoping that their child would be a lover of God. But it's likely that he chose this name for himself when he was converted as an adult, right? And it's also likely that it could be just a title, or even just kind of like a false name of sorts to hide his proper identity, because he's called most excellent Theophilus. And this could be a man of great power in the Roman in the Roman government. And so if it was known that he was a Christian, his life could be in danger. And so maybe this is Luke's way of protecting his identity from those around him by using this name, lover of God. But in Christian circles, they would have known who Theophilus was and who to take this letter to. But we don't know that. Some people think that this is a general letter written to a whole group of people and that it's for anyone who happens to be a lover of God. I don't think that is the case. I really, personally, I just believe that it's one person. And the way that he is addressed here and also in the book of Acts leads me to think that. Anyways, all right, so this is Acts 1, verse 1. It says, the first account I composed, that's Luke talking about the book of Luke, the gospel. He says, the first account I composed, Theophilus, about all that Jesus began to do and teach until the day when he was taken up to heaven. And then he goes on. But so again, he just kind of, he writes this as though Theophilus is an individual person. He's writing this second letter to him now. And hoping that it will be delivered to him as faithfully as the first letter was, right? Anyway, so that leads me to think Theophilus is just an individual. So back over here to the introduction for Luke. I think the most important thing that I want to stress about this prologue is Luke's relationship with Theophilus. We are told, put that verse here somewhere. Here we are. This is 2 Timothy 2:2. This is Paul writing to Timothy, and it's called a pastoral letter. So Timothy would be like a pastor in training under Paul's ministry. But don't think that this shouldn't be for you or I because we're not pastors of a church, okay? There are several places in the New Testament where Paul writes, do as I do. Follow me as I follow Christ. Those are words of Paul. So what Paul does is it's not peculiar to him. It's something that we're to be doing as well. Paul begins here in the second Timothy, 2nd chapter, 2nd verse. And he says, the things which you have heard from me, Paul, in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. That's what we're to be about. We need to be choosing others that we can teach who will then be faithful to teach others who will teach others. And it's all about a big multiplication table, right? That we would be multiplying our faith by investing in other people. And here we have an excellent example of Dr. Luke investing in the life of Theophilus, who's a new believer. Luke spent 3 years traveling with the Apostle Paul. When Paul's thrown out of town, Luke gets thrown out of town. When Paul gets beaten, I'm going to probably go on the side and say, yeah, Luke got beaten too. When there was a shipwreck, Luke is shipwrecked as well. There's all the hardships that the Apostle Paul suffered through. Luke was right there at his side and most likely suffered as much as Paul did. And yet, Luke is a very humble man, and he doesn't express that anywhere in his writing. He doesn't complain about his circumstances or even mention them, for that matter. But we just can suppose that he's there traveling with Paul. If Paul's having a hardship, whether it's lack of shelter or food or hospitality from strangers, that, well, Luke's having the same problem, right? Anyways, this idea that Luke is mentoring Theophilus, and he's doing this at great cost to himself, a 3-year journey. Who among us would take a 3-year journey so that we could mentor one person? And maybe part of it was that Luke understood, well, Theophilus has a prestigious position, and maybe it would be good to mentor this person so that he could have an influence over the country. Maybe. We don't know that for sure. But anyways, this mentorship cost Luke a great deal. And we need to consider what we're doing in terms of, are we mentoring others, and at what cost? What are we giving up so that we can further the kingdom of God, right? I want to read this verse for you here. This is at the end of John's gospel. It's his last chapter. And so there's been the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. And as many of you will recall, Peter denied Christ 3 times and then became very sorrowful over that. And Jesus goes to Peter and restores him in a very loving, kind, compassionate way. And in John 21, starting in verse 15, Jesus says to Simon Peter, "Do you love me more than these?" Meaning the other disciples. And Peter's response is, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus says to him, "Tend my lambs." And then this goes on again, and Jesus responds, "Shepherd my sheep." And again in verse 17, Jesus says to him again, "Tend my sheep." Okay? "If you love me, tend my sheep. Shepherd my sheep if you love me." So just to summarize, the most important message that I see from this prologue here to Luke's gospel is just this interaction between Luke, the writer, and Theophilus, his intended audience, right? That Theophilus is God's sheep. He is one of God's children, and God cares greatly for him. And he's put it on Luke's heart that he is going to write this letter to be a mentor to Theophilus, this one sheep. And he's doing it from afar. He's not even in the same town with him. He's traveling all over the countryside. I think that's kind of an interesting scenario right there. You don't have to be in the same room to mentor someone. And there are people in your circle of influence, at your work, in your neighborhood, in your families. There are people that you have influence over. How do you interact with them? Are you walking in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, right? That would be the beginning right there. But then also, what are you doing to help them be more grounded in their faith, to be strengthened and to know the truth, as Luke has said here, that he wants Theophilus to know the exact truth about what he's been taught, so that he can stand firm. I mean, that's the whole point, right? That Theophilus will stand firm and not become a victim of the wolves that are maybe surrounding him in his government palace or wherever he's at. That's Luke's mission here. But it needs to be our mission as well. We, each of us, to some degree or another, we're shepherds. We're shepherds and we have sheep around us. Maybe just one, maybe several. But we have sheep around us that God has placed there, I think, divinely placed there for us to mentor. And he wants us to pick up that task and carry it, right? So think about that as you go through your day. Consider who your sheep would be in your little flock, and what you can do to mentor them, to help ground them in the truth so that they can withstand the attack from the wolves around them. Okay. Anyways, thank you for being here. I will come back tomorrow and we will tackle the next verse and see what else Dr. Luke has to share with us, all right? Thank you again. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.